Namaste. This is the third reading of The Origin of the Vel. I'm actually going to break this part down into two sections because it's quite long. This chapter. The chapter is called "And So It Begins." If you ever read it from the Iron World Foundation or from Amazon or from the Patreon site or wherever you got it from. So yes, I'll break this down into maybe two or three podcasts because this could be quite a long podcast if I read out the whole of the chapter and talked about it, all the various bits and bobs of it. Anyway, so I'll just start in July. So this chapter is called "And So It Begins." So this is part 3 of The Origin of the Vel, and I shall just continue now. In the ancient Dravidian Tamil kingdom of the Kalayans, tens of thousands of years before the Pandyan kings roamed the earth. So if you want to know more about that, you can look up the Pandyan kings and the Kalayans and the ancient Tamil kingdoms if you want to know more about this history. Anyway, so there lived a wise and powerful tantric queen, Sironi Mania. So that was a tantric queen of the Kalayans. The kingdom was of a tantric nature, and depending on your school of thought, one could consider it of a selfish, negative, and evil nature. Now, I'll just pause here for a second. Obviously, Aaiyanists shouldn't be sectarian and say that tantric Aaiyanists are selfish or negative or evil or whatever. This is just a reading of The Origin of the Vel, which is aimed at young adults or young children. It's a teaching aid, basically, this book. And there was some discussion about the translation of Dravidian Aaiyani into English. So some of these words like selfish, negative, evil may not have the same, how can I put it, stress in Dravidian Aaiyani as they do in English. So, no, I'll continue on. As Aaiyanists, we must neither condemn nor condone. Okay, that's good. They sort of summarize what I'm thinking as well about the next sentence. Okay. All variations of history lead ultimately to the ocean of truth. Having said that, the Kalayans had enemies in the Ardra Aayanist kingdoms. The ancient Ardra Aayanists, if you recall in the previous podcast, I mentioned the Ardra, like the Harita form of Aayanism, like very eco-friendly. Sorry, that's a very modern term, but they're very one with nature anyway. The ancient Ardra Aayanists strove for pureness and kindness, but differed from today's Harita Aayanists in that they had a dogmatic view on the knowledge, Dravidian Jnana Yoga, and strictly followed rituals and took universal order as their credo. Their form of Aayanism could be described as an amalgam of puritanical Atmani and fervent Ardra. So we talk about the ancient Aayanists now of the Ardra kind. They're not as sort of easygoing as the Harita form is now. They're more puritanical, if that's a correct term to use. They're more strict in their observance. And so they were bitterly opposed to the Kalayans, who were tantric Aayanists at the time. And those two were also quite strict in their interpretation of Dravidian Aayanism at that time, in the ancient past, that is. Obviously now it's all changed, but that is the sort of the context of the story and where it's leading to. Okay, so next paragraph. The Kalayans and Aayanists were united only in a few aspects of their philosophy. They both followed and practiced the ancient teachings of Dravidian Hinduism, the Kalayans from a tantric position, while the Aayanists from a pure positive perspective. They believed in unification with Brahman. So let's talk about that for a second. They may have differences, but they ultimately believed in Brahman oneness, which we all do now, obviously. But in the ancient past, these two groups were two separate sort of. Aayanism now is more sort of unified, if that makes any sense. The Tantrics and the Ardras and Atmanis, they're all part of the same, now we're all part of the same team, I guess. But at that point in time, they're a bit more split, a bit more sectarian. There's probably a word of saying. But they still all believed in unification with Brahman. So the clients, via the destruction of the self and the various dimensions that separate them from Brahman. So they believe in unification with Brahman, and the clients took it from the left-hand path. So they believed in the unification with Brahman via the destruction of the self and the various dimensions that separate them from Brahman. While the pure Dravidian Aaiyanists believed in unity with Brahman via positive meditation, knowledge, and unlocking spiritually and physically all the positive locus between our realm and Brahman center. Both Tantric Aaiyanists and pure Aaiyanists also wanted to rid our realm of the Asuric demon Surapadman. He was said to be Brahman's block. Brahman block in Aayanist terms is called Atek Kayan. Brahman's block is Atek Kayan, as I'd say, and was basically a being that prevented positive locus and negative talas from being formed completely, so that resonant energy could flow between the realms. As you read the origin of the bell, you'll learn more about Surapadman's influence. Obviously, mainstream Hindus also know about Surapadman as well, the Asuric demon. But both Tantric Aaiyanists and Aaiyanists, even though there were different philosophies based around Aayanism, they believed in Brahman unity, Brahman oneness, but they also believed in getting rid of the Surapadman because he blocked the access from lokas. From a positive perspective, lokas, as you know, are positive dimensions, and obviously, and the Tantric Aaiyanists obviously want to open talas, which are negative dimensions, and Surapadman blocked both. This was quite early in his existence, so the demon Surapadman didn't block it completely, but so there was still quite a bit of flow between the realms. But anyway, this will all be explained in a minute if I stop rambling. Okay, as all Aaiyanists know, many tens of thousands of years before the Kalayan incident, obviously we know about the Kalayan incident where, well, you can Google that. I would distract from the story. The ancient Dravidians would invoke and open locus and talas completely as other beings throughout this universe. So tens of thousands of years ago, before the Kalayan sort of destruction of the ancient Tamil lands, the ancient Dravidian people could invoke and open locus and talas completely, as could all other beings as well. Thus, in the earliest times, there was a mixing of gods, devas, demons, asuras, and rakshasas, and other beings from many different realms. Yogic humans could travel to different worlds at different times in different universes simply by opening the respective loka tala dimension and allowing the resonant energy and matter from these planes to enter ours and vice versa. Obviously, I mentioned in the previous podcast that locus and talas, positive and negative, but there are lots of other dimensions as well, like dark and light, and large and small, and what have you. So obviously this text is for kids, really, children, to understand the basics of Aayanism. So, not children, not like 3-year-olds or anything, but like 10, 9 to 16, I'm not sure. I don't know what the age groups of teaching is for these, but it's an Aayanist text that many people, teachers use to teach their young. Okay, so continue on. Arun, in one of his incarnations as Murugan, or even Shiva himself, taught the ancient beings throughout the universes how to do this via the sacred Dravidian Aayanist inscriptions. So that's quite important. So Arun, in one of his incarnations as Murugan, some Aayanists also think it was Shiva actually himself, taught all the intelligent beings throughout this universe, the many universes in fact, how to open talas and lokas via the sacred Dravidian Aayanist inscriptions, the Yantras basically. Thus in ancient tales you'll see a mixture of beings from many realms interacting. For example, Asura demons fighting Deva gods, or humans meeting demigods and other beings, both supernatural and unnatural, predators, ghosts, Vitra, dragons, etc. So in all societies and cultures, you always hear about dragons and ghosts and many different beings. So these beings existed and still exist, okay, except that the boundaries between our worlds are almost blocked now by Surapadman. Thus we hardly interact anymore except in a spiritual and physical manner, in psychic manner. Though there are some interactions, as you all know, just Google ghost sightings or whatever, what have you, but there are still interactions between the spiritual world and the physical world. So it's not quite fully blocked yet. So these beings had been known in all cultures and societies, and it is the truth of this reality as defined by Vishnu. There's an Aaiyyanist text written by Vishnu, which basically lays this foundational thought out, and that's what that sentence is about. So these beings have been known in all cultures and societies, and this truth of this reality is as defined by Vishnu. However, at the time that this history being narrated in this text takes place, the flow of full resonant energy was being blocked partially by Surapadman. Please note, okay, this is in the actual text, then as now, Surapadman blocks the flow of energy, but as all Aaiyanists know, the power of Aaiyani symbols is strong. The Yantras is very strong enough for some resonant energy to flow and can increase as you practice. So as you know, Aayanism is vocational. So the more you practice writing Yantras and opening taras or lokas, whatever you want to do, the more resonantly tuned you'll become. So it's not as easy as it was in the ancient past, but also the humans in the ancient past were much more spiritual than people are now. So there's two things going on there really. But if you keep practicing drawing yantras and opening dimensions like taras or lokas, then you'll eventually get used to it. You'll become resonantly attuned, and opening these realms will become much more easier. So with enough will, one can achieve the same energy flow as before the appearance of the block, Surapadman. But this can take, or may take, many lifetimes of study. So at the time of the instance in this narrative takes place, only 1,000 years had passed since the block Surapadman had been seen, and thus the resonant energy flow was still fairly strong. They're not as strong as before, and should be noted that it is very much weaker in our present age. So let's just recap what that's saying there. So Surapadman appeared. Okay, he had his blocking action on taras and lokas and other dimensions. So he's blocking people from going there. The blocking action gets stronger over time, so it's much stronger now than it was at that time. And the origin of the Veil takes place 1,000 years after Surapadman's appearance. So that's why both the Kalayans and the Ardras wanted to remove Surapadman, because they're blocking their work, basically. So in traditional Tamil Hindu thought, Surapadman is also an asura, a demon, that represents the destructive nature of the ego. But remember, as in all traditions, the layman's knowledge of truth has been simplified to recreate a story to enable the enlightened to comprehend the concepts. Yes, I don't want to sound patronizing by saying the unenlightened, but that's what it says in the text, the translation that was translated from Dravidian Aaiyani. So it doesn't mean like the stupid, it just means people who are not fully aware. So in pure Dravidian Aaiyani thought, Surapadman represents the eternal block, Atek Kayan. Remember that word, Atek Kayan. Removal of the block was incredibly important for both the tantric and non-tantric Aaiyanists, as a block, the spiritual wall, prevented the esoteric artists from fully performing their Dravidian magic/sciences. In Dravidian science can be thought of magic, but it's actually the term is a Dravidian science when you're opening Tala or locus or trying to traverse the dimensions, and then as you map Yantras, that's a Dravidian science. So removal of the block was incredibly important for both the tantric and non-tantric Aaiyanists. As a block, the spiritual wall prevented the esoteric artists from fully performing their Dravidian magic/sciences, as well as preventing any attempt to fully link to the higher aspects of godhood. Please note, one refers to this. This actually coming to what I'm saying now. Please note, one refers to this esoteric art as magical, but is in fact the purest form of Dravidian science, a description of how the universe actually fits together, and how, with that knowledge, one can manipulate reality and the many dimensions and bend it to our will. So let's read that again. That's the esoteric art can be referred to as magical, but in the strictest Aaiyanists form, it's Dravidian science, and describes how the universe fits together and how we can manipulate, how the practitioner can manipulate reality, this physical reality, via the different dimensions. And it says here, bend it to our will. This is not an egotistical act. It's allowing the universe to flow and yourself to move through it, depending on your outlook. So, bend it to your will is a bit of a strong term, I think. But thus is the translation. As we narrate this history, one should remember that Suryapadman had appeared 1,000 years beforehand. So, remember, he appeared 1,000 years beforehand, and then, as I'm narrating the story, this happens 1,000 years later. So 51,000 years ago in our timeline. Suryapadman's presence and magic were already beginning to block the energy from fully flowing, and thus was disrupting the powerful magic and resonant links that the Aaiyanists had enjoyed for countless of thousands of years beforehand. At that time, 50,000 years ago, no one quite knew why Suryapadman was blocking the resonant energy flow. Some said he was a tool of Harmon, and others said he was a hindrance. But at that time, 50,000 years ago, both the High Kalayans and the High Aaiyanists, the Ardus that is, believed the block Suryapadman was a hindrance. So let's think about that timeline for a second. It's 51,000 years ago in our timeline, Suryapadman appeared, and the story is 50,000 years ago. So it's like there's 1,000 years between Suryapadman's appearance and the narration of the storyline. And for 1,000 years, both the High Kalayans and the High Aaiyanists, the Ardus Aaiyanists, believed the block Suryapadman was obviously a hindrance. So I will stop there because the next section is there's another few more paragraphs before the end of this, and I've been talking now for 20-30 minutes, and it's better if you to digest these in small snippets rather than me talk about something for an hour or so or what have you. So I'll stop to the bit where Suryapadman was a hindrance, and I'll continue on the next paragraph next week. I'll actually film the podcast maybe tomorrow or something, and then I'll release it again in a few weeks' time. Yes, as you probably know, I'm recording the podcast, and then the admins. Well, I was an admin, but now we've got some more people coming in as well. We'll release it later on during the week. They'll edit this out, and I was doing a sort of a bad job of the sound quality before, but hopefully with the new volunteers, things will pick up again. So if you like these talks, subscribe to the Patreon, join the Aaiyanists, email me at the info@aaiyanists.org. If you email me, I will answer you within time, we have some volunteers as well who may answer you beforehand, but I'll try to see all the emails and respond to any personal ones that you mention. Things is moving slowly though, so we've only got a few people in the team at the moment. So if you support our work, do become a patron. You can have bespoke yantras and other things, transcripts of these podcasts and ebooks and all sorts of things. So anyway, I will stop there, and I will speak to you next time. I shall leave by pressing the button. Okay, bye.